Hello, I'm Stephen Cummings, and this is another edition of the Citizens Community Forum. We have a special program for you at this time. We are going to speak with His Excellency Itai Bardov, Ambassador of Israel in Panama and non-resident in Barbados, Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and the CARICOM. Among many other assignments, Ambassador Bardov, served from 2012 to 2013 at the Palestinian desk of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs headquarters. And we're going to get his perspective from the diplomatic front as it relates to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinians and the tension over territorial control, as well as Israel's response to Hamas. Our topic, another inside look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and ambassador's perspective. And there are several questions we will be putting to Ambassador Itai. And among those questions, the Hamas, we're going to be talking about the Hamas October 7th massacre and how did we get here, and the Iron Swords operation, what are the main objectives of the operation on the part of Israel. Also, what is the state of ongoing negotiations for the release of hostages? We also going to be, and specifically, asking what steps are being taken by Israel to avoid further civilian casualties. And we have, as I said, a very, very important program for you at this time. And when we come back, we will have a discussion with Ambassador Itai. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and we're talking at this time with His Excellency Ambassador Itai of Israel. And, it's always good to have a historical perspective. And the first question, is just how did we get here? How did we arrive, at this conflict between Israel and the Palestinian state?
And after quite a long struggle, we managed to create an independent Jewish state. It was offered by the United Nations to partition that area, that piece of land, between the Jews and the Arabs. The Arabs rejected the partition plan, Resolution 181, and the Jews accepted it. And following that, Israel declared its independence in 1948, in May of 1948. A day after it declared independence, it was attacked by simultaneously by between 4 to 6 Arab states. And miraculously, this new tiny little Jewish state managed to win, and the state of Israel became a fact. Now, if speaking about what is going on right now, so in Gaza, we've had the Hamas has been in control in Gaza since 2007. Israel actually left Gaza. I mean, Gaza, I'll just say this very quickly because people need to understand the context.
Yes.
Gaza was under Egyptian control between 1948 and 1967. In 1967, there was a six-day war when Israel, in 6 days, beat a number of Arab countries, including Egypt, and took over Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula. In 1979, Israel signed a peace treaty with Egypt, gave back the Sinai Peninsula, which is 3 times the size of the state of Israel, rich with resources, gave it back just for the signature of peace. But Egypt said that it did not want to receive Gaza back. So Gaza stayed under Israeli control.
Right.
But in 2000, and with Jewish settlements within the Gaza, around 10 to 15,000 in Jewish citizens living in that area, in the Strip, but decided to disengage from Gaza entirely without any preconditions, and uprooting families, uprooting graves. We emptied synagogues. There was no Israeli left in Gaza. It was entirely under the Palestinian Authority control. So that was in 2005. In 2006, there were elections in Gaza where actually Hamas won those legislative elections, and they were elected by the vast majority of Gazans, even though the Gazans knew that Hamas is vehemently anti-Israeli, and this would create tension. Because when Israel left in 2005, we all spoke about how hopefully Gaza will become the
Yes.
Singapore of the Middle East.
Yes.
And Authority did not concede the results, did not agree to transfer power to Hamas. So in 2007, Hamas took over in a very violent and bloody takeover in a coup, including throwing Palestinian Authority officials from rooftops and dragging their bodies in the streets. And since then, we've been faced with a barrage of rockets and missiles fired from Gaza towards our cities. And we've had a number of rounds of hostilities between Israel and Hamas.
Since
and now
that
I'm
time,
coming,
yes.
Yeah, and now I'm coming to the October 7th, because up till October 7th, we Israelis, we lived in this kind of misconception that Hamas would not do anything that would endanger its regime, its rule over the Gaza Strip. So we knew they were firing rockets. We did expect, attempts to infiltrate Israel with 3, 4 terrorists. Our main concern was them taking over a school or a kindergarten, and using that as a strategic or tactical terrorist attempt against Israel. We never expected what happened on October 7th. We never expected that.
All right.
And we have a few. We can estimate why Hamas did it, because Hamas knew for certain that Israel would react like any other country would after such a horrendous massacre, after such a barbaric attack, that Israel would react the way it did. Hamas knew it. And if we have time, I'd be happy to explain, why we think Hamas did what it did and the way it did.
All right. Well, I'm sure we're going to get to that, Ambassador. But there is there's another question that I have here, and you talk about an iron sword operation. What are the main objectives of this operation?
Yes, absolutely. So the government has officially declared the objectives, and they are, well, I'd say three objectives. One is to remove the threat of Hamas. No longer we cannot allow Hamas to continue ruling Gaza Strip and being just a mere hundreds of meters away from civilian communities, villages, kibbutzim, and cities. So is removing the threat of Hamas, collapsing the Hamas government. The second objective is to release all the hostages. We have 137 hostages remaining in Gaza, in tunnels, in bunkers.
Yes, because I wanted to get to that point as well. Talking about the hostages, but if you can just explain to us further on this particular issue. We're talking about the operation, this Iron Sword operation. I think a lot of people are probably not fully aware of what this means and the implications of it.
Okay, so Gaza is right next to Israel. There's actually, the distance is 0. I mean, the Israeli communities are very, very near to the border with Gaza. And so once Hamas did what it did on October 7th, and I don't know how many people have witnessed the footage, the pictures, the images, heard the testimonies, the stories. They raped, beheaded, they burned children. They raped mothers in front of their kids, and they burned the children in front of their parents. I mean, just the most barbaric, sadistic massacre that you can imagine, without any kind of regard to human rights, human life. The stories that we are now hearing about how they gang raped young women and what they did is just horrific. And that's when, following what happened, when more or less 3,000 Hamas terrorists infiltrated Israel and did what they did and burnt entire communities and massacred over 1,200 people. We have over 5,000 who were injured, some of them really badly injured, and kidnapped 240 people. That is when the government decided to implement the operation of Iron Sword with the 3 objectives that I mentioned. One is removing the threat of Hamas. The second is liberating all the hostages. And the third one is the resumption of sense of security to Israelis, meaning that Israelis, and to Gazans, by the way, meaning returning to a situation of stability And that will take some time. That will take
Yes,
some time. We'll need a
indeed.
lot of steps for that.
Indeed, indeed, having regard to the historical perspectives as well. But Ambassador, I'm wondering what kinds of support. Of course, it has been said, and I think it's a fact that Hamas, is in fact a terrorist, group, a terrorist organization.
Yes.
What kinds of support, has Israel been getting, and even your office, have been getting, in response to what to the barbarism, and what's happening out there in terms of what Hamas has been doing. What kinds of support have you been getting from the international community, and of course your neighbors?
Yeah. That's a great question, and unfortunately, what is allowed or what is expected from any other government or country is nearly a forbidden privilege for the only Jewish state.
Mm.
And so, I have to say there are countries that are supporting Israel. United States, the Biden administration has been very, strongly supporting us. We've had many European countries, Great Britain, Germany, the majority of the EU have been supporting us, and other countries around the world are supporting us. But we're facing, and you asked about the region, we're facing a lot of criticism as well.
Mm.
And when Israel was attacked, that was okay. But once Israel reacts, many countries are saying, "Hey, you're not allowed to."
Yes.
Stephen, I need to emphasize this:
Mm.
we did not choose this war.
Mm.
It was imposed on us. We did not expect it. We did not want it.
Mhm.
We were forced
Mhm.
to enter this war, and we have no choice, just like any other country would have no choice. And I'm sure Trinidad and Tobago would react exactly the same way. And we are doing everything we can in order to put civilians out of harm's way, and to try and focus on Hamas. But what people tend to forget is that Hamas is the one that is deliberately
Mhm.
using its own citizens as human shields, different kinds of weapons. It's just amazing how they've embedded themselves within civilian population.
Right. Ambassador, you somewhat did, respond or answer, a question that I was going to ask you. And, this having to do with this whole business of whether, Israel has a right to defend itself. And we can have a discussion on, sovereign matters. And that is, I had a program a little earlier on and this month, and the same question was posed, does Israel have a right to defend itself?
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, anyone who does not think that Israel has a right to defend itself, I probably have no discourse with, and I
Mhm.
can, and of course, Israel has a right to defend itself, just like any other country.
Yes.
Israel has a right to defend itself, but is also obligated as a nation
Mm.
amongst the nations to act according to international law, and that is
Yes.
exactly what we are doing.
Mhm.
But our citizens, and on October 7th, we've had Jews, Christians, Muslims, everyone was attacked.
Mhm.
Amongst the kidnapped, we
Mhm.
still have Muslims and Christians and Jews.
Mhm.
Hamas did not differentiate between anyone. And
Oh.
all our citizens, the 9 million Israelis, including the 2 million Muslims who are a part of our society and a part of our country, are all entitled for a sense of security, and all entitled for a sense to defend themselves.
Mhm.
And of course, any country, I would expect any country to react,
Mhm.
at least, because I think other countries would even have reacted in a more vicious way than Israel
Oh.
did, but at least the way Israel had reacted in order to defend its citizens,
Mhm.
defend its borders, and defend itself.
All right. This obviously, Hamas, Ambassador, you would agree, is a threat to global peace, isn't there?
Yes, that's a great point. And it's really important to emphasize this.
Mm.
We are actually a frontier in a global war. Hamas is exactly like ISIS was. By the way, amongst many of the terrorists that were caught or killed on October 7th,
Mm.
quite a few of them had the ISIS flag with them when they infiltrated Israel.
Mm.
This is the same jihadistic, extreme Islamistic ideology. They are attacking Israel because we're an infidel state, an
Oh.
infidel entity
Mhm.
located in an area, where we should not be, because this is only for Muslims.
Mhm.
And once Israel is out of the way, the next will be the international community. We've
Right.
already seen this, by the way, by threats and attacks
Mm-hmm.
perpetrated against civilians around the world, not only Jews, but also against Jewish targets. And Hamas, their ideology is that it is Sharia law. Everyone has to be be a Muslim, and that is part of their ideology. So we're in the frontier of a global war that is taking
All right.
place.
All right. And we'd just like to remind our listeners and our viewers who are viewing us as well. This is the Citizens Community Forum, and we are taking an inside look at the situation in Israel. And of course, with the conflict, the Palestinians, and of course, Hamas, being that group that, being described as that terrorist group, terrorist organization that have been, threatening world peace. I'm talking with Ambassador Itai Bardov, and he would, sort of just giving us some perspectives on this situation out there. Ambassador, I wanted to talk a bit more about, the situation regarding Israeli hostages. And I know that there have been ongoing negotiations for the release of hostages. How has that been going so far, and as we speak?
So, as you know, we had a round of what we call the hostage and prisoner swapping.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to mention a few points here because the fake news and the disinformation is incredible. When the hostages were released, many of the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinians saw photos of hostages smiling, said, "Oh, look how very nicely they were treated." Without taking, first of all, we found out many of the hostages had been drugged upon release. They were told to wave hands. But the testimonies coming out of the hostages, and what we know is happening to the hostages that remain in Gaza, in these tunnels, are just horrendous, and including sexual abuse, violence. This is, by the way, testimonies not only coming from Israelis, but also foreign hostages from Thailand, Nepal, who have been speaking about especially what has been done to the Israeli hostages. But really, terrible, terrible stories coming out. We are very careful with the hostages that have been released, not to force them in telling their story. They need their time. But what is coming out is just horrendous.
Yep.
And so we had a deal with Hamas, with different mediators, where we released for 4 days of a truce.
Yes.
We released 50 hostages. They released 50 hostages, and we in return released 150. And any additional day of truce would come if they release an additional 10 hostages, when one of the conditions was that the children and mothers and women had to come first. And unfortunately, at a certain point, Hamas did not. At the beginning, the swapping went as planned, but at a certain point, Hamas did not agree to release. There are still around 20 young women still in Hamas captivity, and Hamas has not agreed to release them. And we can imagine why. Unfortunately, we're very concerned for their well-being. We can imagine why they are not being released. But it's important to emphasize all the prisoners that Israel has in its prisons, in its cells, are all being visited by the Red Cross, International Red Cross. Their families know where they are. They have access to medical care. They're being, food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They can even study. The Israeli hostages, who are not terrorists that were apprehended, young children. We still have men over 75 years old, women who are 75 years old and older. We have no idea what their situation is. Where are they? They are not allowed to be visited by International Red Cross. So it's just there's a huge difference between the two sides here. And right now, yes, sorry.
Yeah. Ambassador, this business of defense diplomacy has always been a tough business, and I imagine for you, having to sit, I suppose, in the middle of, of the battle, so to speak. You have to be able to continue, that pushing the envelope, as it were. As I said, defense diplomacy is not an easy task. I'm wondering, from a personal level, and also from a professional level, Ambassador, how have you been, been dealing with this and responding to this?
And thank you for that question. It's a really good question. I keep saying this. Israel, we had 1,200 of our citizens killed in a few hours, just brutally murdered. And we did not have the privilege in mourning with the families and in consoling them, because immediately we found ourselves in two battles. One against a barbaric, sadistic terrorist organization in Gaza, which is buried under tunnels that it's been preparing for decades. And the second is on the diplomatic level. And that's what I'm doing on a daily basis, trying to explain how we have the right to defend ourselves, just like any other country in the world would have. And we, as I said, we are not entitled to the same rights that any other nation, any other government is entitled to. It is extremely difficult. I have to share. I give presentations, and we present also big parts of the images of the material, the footage that was taken. Many of it was taken by the terrorists themselves, who uploaded it on social media to boast on how they killed and mutilated Jews. It is an extremely difficult time for me personally, but I think for all Israelis, because right now there's Israelis who are even feeling that this is an existential threat that we're facing. And it's a terrible battle. We have we're hearing of young soldiers, for instance, who are dying nearly every day, and we're very concerned. But we know that we will prevail. We will prevail. But this is a very difficult time for us, and of course, we are deeply concerned for the well-being of all the hostages.
All right, Ambassador, having the concern and of course being very, very much focused on this this Hamas group, terrorist organization, and of course trying to mitigate as much as possible. I want to press you further on this, specifically what steps are currently being having regard to what you've just said. What steps are being taken now by Israel to avoid even further civilian casualties, because we've had them in the thousands.
Yes, and by the way, there are even testimonies by different military personnel saying that what the steps that Israel is doing is unprecedented. They're unprecedented. No other military has actually done these steps. So what we do is we warn beforehand. We give warning via broadcasting, flyers, and I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of flyers from the air that drop within the areas that Israel is planning to attack, because we know that Hamas is embedded there, has infrastructure there. And we even call thousands and thousands of phone calls to residents saying, leave your house, because in 2 days, in 72 hours, we are going to be attacking. Now, the disadvantage in this is that we are also warning Hamas that we are planning to come. But we try to do everything that we can in our power to avoid civilian casualties. And even there are even cases when the military was about to attack, and then it noticed that there are children in the vicinity, even though it was supposed to be evacuated, and they refrained from attacking. So we will continue abiding by international law, but we'll continue abiding by our moral conscience, where we do not want to see civilians harmed. It is mission impossible, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
It is just completely impossible, because Hamas is using them as human shields. And I'll tell you something ironic. It's easier actually for the military, the Israeli military, to combat another military that has airplanes and tanks, because it's in the battlefield, than combating these murderers who are using civilians, children and women, hiding behind them, and to pinpoint them. It is extremely, extremely difficult. But I just want to tell you one last point, Stephen. Even if we follow the Hamas reports of the number of casualties, and we do not believe these reports, because all the reports coming out from Gaza of casualties, they are only dependent on Hamas. None of them are combatants. None of them are terrorists. They're all, children, which of course is ludicrous. But even when you look at that, and the number that you would have expected, if Israel would have just indiscriminately fired these bombs, towards Gaza, the numbers would have been 50 times larger than what Hamas is claiming. And we're saying that what Hamas is claiming is exaggerated and is wrong. But I do not want to give the perception that the Gazans are not suffering. They are. This is a war is terrible, but the responsibility is entirely on Hamas' shoulders.
But as you talk about that, Ambassador, as well, it's a fact that Hamas has been, leading a campaign. Some describe it as a misinformation campaign, and they have been using the media in a very calculated way as well. I'm wondering, where is Israel in terms of responding, to that aspect of it, in terms of the misinformation on the side of the media, the international media. We get, we get the news here. We look at what's happening on the television and on the radio, and they are screaming headlines, and some of it, Ambassador, quite rightly, are skewed, in favor of Hamas, and you sell them something you don't ever get the other side,
Yeah.
What has Israel been doing in terms of treating with that aspect of it, having regard to what you've said? As I said, they have been leading, and in some instances they have been successful in some instances in leading a mass information campaign.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I have to admit that in that regard we are in a huge disadvantage. If each side is supporting it's a you only in numbers we have a huge disadvantage. The other problem is that when Israel comes out with information, it is always verified. The international media will always want to verify that information, but because they don't have any other ways of verifying information coming from Gaza, they will take Hamas' word for it. And the one excellent example is when that missile, that rocket, hit the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza.
Yes.
And if you remember, it was a misfired rocket fired by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that hit a hospital in the middle of the night. And immediately Hamas came out and said, Israel fired a missile that destroyed the hospital, killed 500 people, always majority children, as they always like to use that, in less than an hour, which is impossible to actually verify these numbers. All the international media parroted, cited this information, and only many hours later, and by the way, this sparked many demonstrations around the Arab world, huge demonstrations. And only hours later, when evidence surfaced that showed clearly that this was a misfired rocket, between 10 and 20% of rockets fired from the terrorist organizations in Gaza fail and fall in Gaza. And this was a misfired rocket, and it took like 4 days.
4 days.
Yeah. AP, BBC to come and say, to retract their initial reports and say that this was a misfired rocket. But and in the next day, the following day, by the way, what was shown that the Al-Ahli hospital was not even damaged. This rocket fell in a parking lot, and there were some Palestinians killed in that area, but a fraction of the number that was told. But the damage was already done. So we have a huge disadvantage when it comes to numbers on social media. We have a huge disadvantage when it comes to what is needed to be done by Hamas to have its own, allegations published in the international media for what Israel needs to be done. Now, what it needs to do. Now, we do try and voice our side and our perspective, but it's a drop in a bucket. If I speak about myself, I'm a small embassy. I'm an ambassador for a small embassy. I have a small number of people assisting me, and we're in Panama covering a number of Caribbean countries. That's all I have. While in each one of these countries, they have populations who automatically stand against Israel, and the amount of misinformation, of fake news that I see coming out in Caribbean media, and I'm sorry to say this, but is just amazing. It's tremendous how much the information is so, I'll say in a diplomatic way, not precise.
Okay, well, you are a diplomat, so I would expect to get that response from you. But Ambassador, as you talk about the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, being part of the Caribbean region, how concerned, should we be here in this part of the world? And I'm seeing that, we have just a few minutes again. Our time will be up just momentarily. But I want to get, just 2 questions in quickly. How concerned do you think, we should be here in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I'll try to be very brief, but I'll say, I know that during the war against ISIS, there have been cases of Trinis going to fight alongside ISIS. So I can imagine it's a very small number of people, and of course I'm sure that the vast majority of the different communities in Trinidad and Tobago are peace-loving people. It doesn't matter if they're Muslim or Christian I have no doubt. But even a small number, if it's a few dozens of people who are very extreme and have an extreme ideology, they can cause a lot of damage. They can murder, or they can threaten. They can cause a lot of damage. So I think any country in the world has to be very vigilant and aware of its own what's happening internally, its own surroundings. And I'll say also, we have to hope that the conflict that's taking place only remains in Gaza and doesn't really spread too much, because then this is a ripple effect and it can
Yes.
keep on spreading.
Right.
I think right now, Trinidadians do not have to be too concerned, but you always need to have to be vigilant and to worry a little bit.
All right. Well, then, of course, I talked about the threat to global peace. As we wrap up the interview, Ambassador, what are the main objectives, or should I say, obstacles, preventing, a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestine, and of course, we're looking at Hamas. What are some of those things you believe, have been, placed in the middle of what can possibly be, or is there at all, hope that this war can end?
Well, I think we'll always have to be hopeful and optimistic. But if you look in the recent past, Israel has offered 5 times peaceful resolutions, and I'm talking about a 2-state solution to the Palestinian side. Listen to Hillary and Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton says that the Palestinians could have had a country, their own country, 23 years ago. They got the most generous offer that you could imagine, and they declined. And I think one of the reasons is this terrible indoctrination taking place within Palestinian schools, where they're taught that the Jews are bad, the Jews stole their land, they have to hate Jews. So how can they grow up and wanting to have peace with this neighboring entity? So I think the first thing, you have to change the education within the Palestinian society, because it's horrific. I'll just give you an example of how different the culture is. When God forbid, an Israeli Jew will kill an Arab on and these are very few cases that happen, but they can happen. We have extremists. Everyone has their own. They will immediately be condemned as terrorists in Israeli media and by the society, because we are absolutely against any kind of murder at all. Doesn't matter if it's Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. On the other side, a Palestinian that will commit a terrorist attack and kill Jews will be, and you'll see the people going to the streets and give out sweets because they kill Jews. The media will call him a martyr, a holy martyr. He'll be veneered as someone who is, a just martyr. And the government, the Palestinian Authority, pays money. It's called pay for slay. Pays money to the families of these terrorists that perpetrated terrible terrorist attacks. Okay. So we have to change the mindset. First of all, we have to regain trust. And now it's going to take a long process. Following 7th of October, there is no trust whatsoever. The Israelis do not trust the Palestinians at all. I mean, we said we left Gaza in 2005. We were hoping for them to take advantage of this and build their own viable, independent entity. And instead, this is what we got. So we'll need to rebuild trust. It's going to take time, but we need to change the mindset, the education, the way that the young Palestinian minds are poisoned to hate Israelis.
And I'm sure the media, Ambassador, has a lot, to do with that as well in terms of the education. There's this thing about media literacy as well, and even the young, young persons among us, whether they're in the Caribbean, in other parts of the world, that's what they are being fed, Ambassador. Whatever comes over the screen or whatever comes over the radio, that's what they believe. So I believe there also has to be a part to play on the part of the media and in terms of the kinds of information that is fed to a national and a global population.
I totally agree. And I think people who read news, and I urge everyone to take all the news that they're reading with a large pinch of salt. I mean, be very careful with what you're reading and what you're seeing. The media, by the way, many times it's just, they're taking stuff from another source and copying it. Because if you look at the Caribbean media, they do not have their own people on the ground, which I understand. It's these are small countries, Israel and Gaza. It's on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. We're very far away. It's very so, and many times they kind of cherry pick what to publish. And at the end of the day, these news reports are not enough, and sometimes are very distorted or don't give the full picture. And it's and I'll just say this: after the attack occurred on October 7th, we got a lot of comforting messages from many, unbelievable how, they were shocked by what happened. But I told my staff, this is not going to take long, because we are loved when we are victims, or we are respected when we are victims. But when we stand for ourselves and when we defend ourselves,
yes, you become,
that is when we are criticized.
You become the hated.
Yeah, we're loved when we're dead, unfortunately. I mean, or when we're victims, but we're not allowed to defend ourselves. So I knew that the tables would turn. It's automatic. If you look what happened, I mean, in Yemen, how many millions of people have been affected, hunger, killed. I mean, unbelievable numbers, terrible. Have you seen people go into the streets to demonstrate for the Yemens that have been killed, for the children? Just check the numbers. I urge everyone, look what happened in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in different places. But only when it's Israel, that is when you see these floods of demonstrations in the streets.
All right. This is also important, I believe, to us here in the Caribbean, Ambassador. You probably would be aware that we also have a situation brewing between Venezuela and Guyana. There's a matter now that is at the International, Court of Justice, and of these little things that can open up into something that becomes unmanageable if we are not careful. And this is why I believe that we have to keep pushing this thing about defense diplomacy is very, very important, and the education of a people and of a population is also very, very important. Ambassador, unfortunately we are running out of time, but I want to give you the final moments to give us some closing remarks in this regard, with respect to this conflict that we have been trusted.
First of all, thank you, Stephen. And we cannot have a dialogue with a terrorist organization that is committed to the destruction of the state of Israel. I was interviewed by a journalist from Suriname, and he told me, he said, Suriname is a land of peace, a nation of peace. Maybe Israel can learn from Suriname how to do that. And I told him, I just very quickly just give my answer. I said, we did peace. We gave the Sinai Peninsula. We've given a lot to Jordan just to have the signature for peace. But I'll make a deal. Suriname gets from Israel, let's do a neighbor swap. You get Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, ISIS, Syria, Iran, and we get Guyana. Okay. And let's see, how we can face peace. So,
all right, Ambassador, I'm sorry to be we're out of time. I want to thank you for talking with us, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk again. Well, there you have it, another inside look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Ambassador's perspective. This is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. Thanks for joining us.